Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, theater, and entertainment. And today we're so fortunate to be joined by the stars of the latest STARZ series, The Gloaming. We have Emma Booth and Ewen Leslie. And Ewen, you've described how when you first read the scripts that you really just found that there were so many intricacies and so many details, particularly when it came to character in a way that doesn't always exist in scripts. So I wanted to actually ask you about how that really helped you in terms of your character development and building out a lot of the story of who this character was going to be and how you were going to bring him to life.
Yeah, look, I think one of the first things that Vicky spoke about was sort of the PTSD of the character. I mean, this is a character who's been a part of this traumatic event when he was younger, when he was 17. He went away for 20 years, and then he's kind of thrust back into this case in Tasmania where he has to confront all this trauma from his past. And one of the first things she said to me was, it's like the second he lands, it's like the spirits start closing in on him. And I think there's, the actual ghosts that are haunting him, but then there's also the ghosts of the past that we sort of carry with us, and the idea that you might be done with the past, but the past isn't done with you. And I think what was very clear about this from the word go is that beyond the kind of police mystery at the center of it and then the case that these two characters were dealing with, it was very clear that Vicky was very interested in making a character-based show about two broken and damaged people. And at the center of it was sort of a love story as well. These two people who were going to sort of hopefully help mend each other. And I was very lucky and very blessed that I was able to do that with the extraordinary Emma Booth.
And similarly, Emma, you've described your character as like just being so multifaceted, but also incredibly nuanced. So kind of how did the fact that the scripts were so detailed really help you in figuring out a lot of the minute details of who she was as a character?
Yeah, I was definitely very impressed by, firstly, Vicky's writing. I was like, wow, she's extraordinary. And I was so pulled in by the script, the story as a whole, not just Molly. And I just thought she was so kind of like different for, this woman who was a detective. And what I loved about what Vicky does is she is very nuanced and she does think about the detail. The minute detail, and that's why it's such a kind of, the story itself is quite convoluted, but of course you're like, what is happening at some points, and then it just all kind of comes together and marries together and you're like, wow, genius. She's so good at that. But in that time it was like, okay, now I've got to really find Molly in this and really find who she is and find these nuances. And of course she'd already worked out a lot of the backstory Vicky had. It was fantastic because a lot of writers don't do that. They're like, just go for it. But she was like, no, I've got all this here. And then we worked out other stuff, and then I was like, I've got to find some interesting kind of idiosyncrasies or just strange little things or habits about the character to make them interesting, because that's what makes a character interesting. It's like, okay, let's start layering in stuff, and came up with this little thing that she does when she's concentrating and using her extraordinary memory, with her fingers. It kind of got in there in the first scene and then it kind of disappeared. You hope that it's going to get into the cut when they're editing it, but sometimes it doesn't always work that way. And, we're like, let's have Molly always eating. It's like, yeah, she's always eating. Great. So I'm like stuffing my face in every scene. I'm like, oh my God, not another pie. We had this hilarious pie scene where it was like 10 pies in. I was like, I can't do the pies anymore. But it was funny. It was like, how much interesting stuff can we add? And it's like, at the end of the day, that's when you get a really rich character, is when you bother to really flesh a character out like that. And so she was, Vicky's extraordinary for that, and just fantastic at writing characters in general.
And as the two of you were figuring out the interpersonal dynamics between your characters, how did you navigate thinking about the fact that these are two people that knew each other at a certain point, were very, intimately connected to each other, but haven't seen each other in 20 years, and just determining what are the things that they both really know about each other, that maybe even there's things and details that nobody else would know about the other person, but at the same time, with that really vast amount of time in between, they've obviously grown and become slightly different people in certain ways. So how did the two of you map out what those details specifically were going to be with each other?
Vicky had written a very clear backstory in regards to who they were then and what the relationship was then. It was funny what Emma was just saying about fleshing things out. Like, I think so much of the way that Vicky writes, especially with this show, is so much of what's going on, it's about what's not being said. And a lot of the time it's sort of existing between the lines. So when, when Alex says to Molly, "Oh, it wasn't my idea to come here," that's, "I'm so sorry for being here. I'm so sorry for everything that happened. I can't tell you how incredibly sorry I am about that, but you need to understand." I mean, it's all this stuff that they want to say that they're completely unable to say. And I think, Emma and I were very clear about what was going on underneath the scenes a lot of the time. And it's also worth noting that Emma and I think we'd done a day together on a short film years and years ago. But beyond that, we're both from Western Australia. We both grew up in Fremantle. We both have relatives that live down the coast in Busselton in sort of rural Western Australia. And we both had done children's TV series in WA. So we had this kind of weird situation where we actually sort of had a shared experience and a shared history without actually sharing it together. And, it's funny, we kind of had, there was a lot of that came to it as well. But I was very blessed, as I was saying before, in that, Emma is I'll just talk behind your back, in front of your face. Is a very, she's very free as an actor, and she's very reactive, and she's, you can kind of throw anything at her and it will she'll roll with it. And sometimes she gets sent off in different directions. And it was very exciting to work opposite, but also very, it made chemistry very easy because you're dealing with someone who's very open. And, I think as I said, I was very blessed to be able to do it with Emma.
Oh, that's so nice.
Oh, no problem.
I know. You always hope, is it okay if I talk? I don't even know if I'm seen right now.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, you always hope to someone great, like really hope, especially when you think, wow, this show could go on for many years. But, apart from that, you're going to spend 5 months with this person, sometimes, 15, 16-hour days. That's rare, that many hours per day. But still, you're like, please let me get along with this person. Please let there be chemistry. Please let them be really lovely, or at least, easy to get along with. And so, yeah, I was very happy with you too, Ewan. I was like, oh, yes, because I have worked with actors before where they're really difficult and really precious about a lot of things, and it can really upset the dynamic on set and the production itself. And so, that's a big thing. So we were very lucky with each other, and he's such an extraordinary talent as well. You're like, great, you're going to make me look better. So that's tick. It's always good. But just to quickly answer your question as well, from prior to this, there was so much going on. Obviously, there's so much backstory and so much weight between them both, and so much history. And it was difficult at times, to be honest, to show that without saying the words. But then you're doing a police procedural as well on top of it, and it's like, how there were times where it's like, am I doing this right? Really, there's so much going on, and then you've got the supernatural element at the same time of ghosts walking behind you, but staying grounded in your performance, and so it was tricky. It was a tricky shoot at times where you're like, wow, I've got to take into account all of this stuff and still make people believe me. And so yeah, it was a challenging shoot, but very rewarding. So that's good.
And in the way that she writes scripts, Victoria also loves to have the entire storyline mapped out, but not to write those final scripts until she has the opportunity to be on set and see who these characters become. And when you look at those final couple of episodes now, are there aspects that you see in who they are in those points of the show that you really can tell that like came from her writing and just seeing the way that you were breathing life into these characters and what you had really developed them into at that point?
There was definitely a sense as we went along, and Vicky said this, that, you know, the more we went along and the closer we got to the end, she kind of went, look, the characters are kind of yours now, you know, like, I think she kind of trusted us to make choices with them. I mean, it's funny, the first conversation I ever had with her, she told me the whole plot down to the final shot. So I knew where it ended. I knew the final shot of the show and what that was going to be. But she hadn't written those final scripts. So at the same time, you know, I think there were things that she was very clear about, and then other stuff that she was a bit more fluid with as well, like things that possibly changed as it went along. But, you know, early on, you're all trying to get to know each other. And we were talking before about sort of process and collaboration, that a lot of the time it is compromise. I mean, if I show up on set with Emma and go, look, I'm just going to be Alex O'Connell the whole time and closed off and not talk to you, then, you know, I mean, that is a certain way to work, but it's also not going to be very fun for Emma. It probably won't be fun for me either. And, you know, I think, you know, the more we went along with it, the more trust there was from all of us with each other. And, you know, I think Vicky did have it all very mapped out. And, yeah, you know, it's funny because early on you're kind of going, I want to show this bit, or I want to show that, I want to show this. And, you know, you've got to kind of, especially with characters that are so closed off. And I think it really became a process of also trusting that Vicky was going to do that, but that she had a long game in mind. And I think especially as we kind of got those final scripts, she started to go, oh, right, of course, you were always planning on doing that. And, you know, she, especially with the relationship at the center of it, I think she had a very clear journey that was charted out for us. And, yeah, we were very lucky.
I also wanted to talk about the location and the setting of the show, because, you know, there's a huge intent in placing this in Hobart because there's such an aspect of community that comes into who these characters are. But I also thought you both did really interesting things with your characters in their relationship to that community and the spaces that they're in. You know, there's tiny details where like Molly goes into the fish and chip shop and she knows that the door doesn't close properly because she's been in there 1,000 times before, you know. And then with Alex, it's the fact that there's spaces that you walk into and he's very familiar with, and then there's places that have clearly changed in the time that he's been gone. So he doesn't have that kind of like fabric feeling of where everything is as much. And so I was really interested in the way that you really built a lot of character details from those settings and the way that you interacted with a lot of the locations beyond that aspect of community.
Yeah, that's Vicky's brilliant writing again. It's all about the nuance. Do you know what I mean? So she was really injecting that into it. But of course, she grew up in Tasmania, and that it is her community. And Tasmania is her home. So, you know, she was all over that. Do you know what I mean? And also it was like, okay, great. So we're going to shoot this show, because obviously she shot the Kettering incident, incredible show in Tasmania as well. But yeah, it was like, great. So my next show will be in Tasmania. Of course, it's all, you know, based around the community and all of that. But it's like, just being able to shoot Tasmania, extraordinary Tasmania, and the landscapes of it, I really think they took it to a next level in the Gloaming. So it was really interesting how, to be honest, I don't think I've ever really seen Tasmania being shot like that. So it was quite new to really highlight how extraordinary it is. And so that was a huge part of it, to really make Tasmania itself one of it is the main character. Do you know what I mean? And really Yeah, just make it shine big time for the rest of the world. So everyone's going to book a ticket to Tasmania soon. They're going to be like, you know what, it's time. Especially after seeing this, because it really is so otherworldly. It's like no other place on the planet. And, although I'm sure other people have seen shows that have been made there, I don't think they've seen it shot in this light, and it's quite new. So, yeah, it's great for tourism.
And then you were touching a little bit before upon the trauma that your character is dealing and processing from his childhood. And so I wanted to dive into that with you a little bit in terms of how you really mapped out the idea of this trauma that he's been carrying with him for 20 years and has really been repressing and not having the opportunity to confront it and deal with it. But then in coming back home, he's really forced to confront it in so many ways. And so you really allow it through your performance to kind of gradually simmer up to the surface in a lot of different ways. And so I was really interested in the way that you thought about the different stages of what that was like for him emotionally as the series progresses.
Look, a lot of the work, sorry, we'll just keep talking about Vicky. I mean, we were lucky that a lot of that was done by Vicky in terms of giving key moments and scenes where we're allowed to do it. I mean, I think Emma faced similar challenges in that you're playing characters that are very closed off, that keep their cards very close, that don't like to let people in. But you can't do that for 8 hours, So you've also got to find places, you're trying to balance that with a deep vulnerability, because that's where that's coming from. So trying to constantly find the places where you can kind of crack them open and let other people in and let the audience in. And, that was sort of the line you were constantly walking, times that you went, oh man, maybe I went a bit too far there, or maybe I'm a bit too closed off there. Or, I think Emma and I were both trying to negotiate that and find that a lot of the time. And then we're lucky in that there were clear moments where it was like, oh, that's obviously a scene where we're meant to see this, moments of being more vulnerable and, but that was kind of the great thing about it, is that there's sort of this ghost story at the center of it that's really sort of wrapped up with trauma and grief that both of these characters have. I mean, they're being haunted by these ghosts, but also haunted by the ghosts of their past. And I suppose, I certainly played a character who had to confront that. I mean, his journey is through the show, he becomes a lot more proactive and realizes that if he's going to deal with this, he has to kind of take it on head on, and he has to, ultimately he's the one that has to walk through the door. And that was, really the journey of that character. It's funny, just before we were talking about landscape, and I've said this already today, but I think it's when I first arrived in Tasmania, I got off the plane and I was driving into Hobart, and we had to drive through these mountains, and I saw this sort of low-hanging fog hanging on these mountains. And I remember thinking, oh, that's the show, like this kind of like mist, this sort of veil, that's this low-hanging veil that sort of, obscures the surface and hides the surface of things, but also blurs the line between what's real and imagined. And, I think shooting it in Tasmania just brought so much to the show. And as Emma said, it's a location and a place that people haven't seen that much of, or certainly haven't seen in this way.
And Emma, was that similar to what Ewen was saying, where kind of like on a daily basis with each scene, you felt like you were just negotiating and figuring out where she was at in terms of processing previous trauma and previous grief?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, she's a closed book, so it was like doing it discreetly. And I think it was the private moments where you really got to see into who Molly was. Often when she was alone, you'd see her kind of break down, or you'd see what, her real sensitivities or who she was. Obviously, there's other moments as well, as Ewan says, really obvious moments where you're like, oh, I'm running, trying to save my daughter from getting thrown off the dam. Yeah, I'm going to be freaking out there. But it was like, she's been so hurt in the past, and she's been abandoned, and her father committed suicide, and there was just so much hurt there for her, that and especially with Alex just kind of getting up and leaving after the tragic incident, it was like she's just like I ain't letting anyone in. Do you know what I mean? It's like, whoa, but she is the most sensitive person in the room. And that was also a note that Vicky gave me. I was like, okay. So, it really, as I said, there were days where it was like, how do I do this? How do I put all of this together and make it work? But, we did. And we also had 3 fantastic directors who had great notes. And then Vicky that was there who was like, hey, but yeah, obviously giving her notes as well. But she did, by the kind of middle of the shoot, she was like, I really, hey, the character's yours now. Just, just go with it. You know who these characters are. But it was, it was a real dance to get it all down. And then, as I said, tying in the supernatural elements and then the kind of the police work on top of it, and like dying emotionally inside, but not showing anything. And like, oh my God, am I still in love with Alex? And it was, there's a lot to tie in there. But I like the challenging shoots. I like to be challenged. And I think it's safe to say, Ewen, don't you agree? It was definitely a challenging one, but worth it. Yeah. So worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I feel like with Molly, one of the scenes where you really capture a lot of that rawness is there's that moment where her ex comes to the door and he says that he wants to take custody of their daughter and to have sole custody. And I thought you gave such a stunning performance in that scene that really, it's not even just about that singular moment, that's everything coming to the surface for her. And it just feels like everything is being ripped from underneath her, even at the possibility of hearing those words before it becomes an actuality potentially. And so I want to talk a little bit specifically about that scene and how you process so many different layers of emotion into that moment.
Oh, thank you very much. It's funny, I just thought about it and I started to feel teary. It's interesting. I'm a very sensitive person myself, so it's very easy for me to get to places emotionally. So it's interesting that it started to bring up stuff. Yeah, I just had to, it was funny, we didn't have much time to shoot that scene. It was shot very quickly and it was like, okay, how would I feel if I had literally the world ripped from under me? Everything taken away from me. And I had to really quickly find moments of loss in my life because I use my own experience. And so it's kind of like going through a filing cabinet, like it sounds weird, but it's actually quite scientific in my mind. I'm like, yes, that one. And I just sink into it. I just bring it up. I have a way of doing it. I've never trained in acting, so I've had to teach myself and learn on the job. And just learn, get a toolbox, put all the things in the toolbox, and then learn to be able to bring them up at the right moments. But I had to go through a process in that of her, disbelief and like, hang on, anger, and then just heartache. And do you know what I mean? So it was like switching from, different emotion to the next emotion to the next emotion. So it was a short scene, but it was a trickier one to get right because it is her at her most vulnerable because her daughter means more to her than anything else in the entire planet. And someone saying, well, you can't have that anymore. It's like someone saying, I'm going to chop off your leg, or do you know what I mean? It's like, or cut off your oxygen. But yeah, it was really just finding my own experience that was similar, even if it's on a much smaller scale, and then just going with it. But I really find if you've got another actor that's really present with you, they don't even have to be the best actor in the whole entire world. If they're just really present and really in that moment with you, where it's like attention, you can look into each other's eyes. If you get that there, it's like there's something happens energetically where it's just going to evoke emotions in you. It just brings it out. You get out of your head and you kind of drop into your heart. And it's kind of, I don't know if that makes any sense at all. Yeah. But, the other actor, Dutch, was, he was fantastic. It's not like he had the largest role in it, but I really enjoyed working with him. And that's also why Ewan's just amazing, because he was also great to be in the moment with, you know.
I actually played that ex. I'm just that transformative.
You what?
I actually played your ex-husband in the show. I'm just like that transformative. Play multiple roles.
You played another actor playing another character.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I played a much better actor playing a character. Yeah.
Now you're confusing my head.
And because it was mentioned before, you know, there is a slight procedural element within the show, but it's, you know, again, I think it's Vicky's writing is just so stunning, and the character work within that. So even when there's jargon moments, and particularly when the two of them are interviewing other people, you know, these are people that they know, that they have a storied history with. So it's not just a case of I'm asking you questions and I'm trying to get you to relinquish information to me and to give me details. There's so much subtext to those conversations. So I was really interested in how you worked and finessed, both of you, a lot of the text in those particular scenes, particularly when they're questioning people throughout this case, and really found what that character subtext was going to be so consistently.
That's interesting. That was a great scene. Ewan, that was like our first scene with Greg, wasn't it? Or one of the first ones?
Yeah, the big scene with Matt
Matt Testro.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a lot of dialogue. I remember for me, and it was like
Emma and I are going to have very different answers to this, so I'll let her go first.
Can't wait.
Yeah, look, for me, it was like, okay, so I just need to keep what I know about this dude in front of me, what I believe, and the information I have. I just have to keep that in the back of my mind. But at the same time, he's saying stuff about my daughter, or Molly's daughter, that I'm like, this is so out of line. I'm literally going to punch you in the face. Do you know what I mean? But keeping it together as a police officer, and yeah, it's really just keeping that information right there. So whatever's said, you've got the correct answer going through your mind, even if, you know, something else is coming out of your mouth. And so it's really, again, that's a dance, getting all of that down. And yeah, just making it, again, really nuanced subtext. And again, that was a tricky scene. Anyway, you go.
It's funny, like I've played a lot of proactive characters in the past, people who are kind of driving the story or driving scenes, and it's kind of interesting to all of a sudden be playing someone that's quite on the back foot and is very silent and in their own heads. I mean, sometimes the beauty of being able to have a lot of dialogue, it's funny, like sometimes it's easier to have a lot to do than it is to have one line, because so much of the time as an actor, you're just trying to get out of your own head, or at least I am, you know. And it's funny when, especially that first scene with Emma and Matt, is that Molly is driving the interview, and there's so much going on between them, and the conversation is bouncing around so many places, and they both did such a beautiful job in that scene. But it was funny having to be the person in that scene, true to his character, that is just observing and just watching. And you've kind of got to find a journey and a story through the scene without any dialogue, where you're kind of going, oh, is she going too far with this? I'm kind of worried for this guy. Oh, he said that, now I'm worried for her. Where is this going? And, you know, I think a lot of the time that was part of the great challenge of playing Alex, was that he was someone that was very much in his own head a lot of the time. And, you know, that's kind of where I existed so much of the time in the show. And, you know, it's sort of, I think there's challenges both ways, you know, and there's frustrations both ways. If you're the person that has to be driving so much of it, and then if you're the person that isn't driving, sitting back on it. And yeah, you know, I think Emma and I a lot of the time we're just trying to balance each other out with that. But we're also helped. Matt Testro, who plays Freddie, was just fantastic in that scene. So I also got to just watch two great performances for 5-10 minutes. So that was nice as well.
And you mentioned the directors of the show before, and they're so adept at working with genre and playing around with that. And one of the brilliant things of this show is the way that it kind of leads you into the idea of genre and then circumvents what you think you're maybe going to see on screen in a lot of ways. And so I was really curious about the way in which the directors on the series worked with both of you in terms of how much information are we going to give across, when are we going to make the audience think that something's going to happen and maybe circumvent that idea within a scene, or if that was a dance that you were discussing with them at all.
Yeah, I think they're all three brilliant directors, and they're all very different in their own ways. But yeah, they definitely had like special moments where they're like, in this moment, go for it. Do you know what I mean? They knew the script that well. The scene was completely kind of mapped out and very nuanced, you know. Some of the directors more than others. Do you know what I mean? I won't say specific names, but some of them were like, get in there and just go for it. And then another particular director who was way more kind of specific to certain lines and this and that. Do you know what I mean? But I really enjoyed how they, all the different ways that they worked. And I thought they got some fantastic stuff out of, yeah, all the actors, all of us. And I think we really trusted them. Well, I did anyway. And so, yeah, it was good actually, because sometimes it doesn't work that way so much with directors. But yeah, they had a vision too, and they'd also gone through everything with Vicky, and Vicky had given her notes on the scene, and this is a really important moment because it's all about the nuance, the gloaming. So it's like, you know, just like we need a shot of one glass here that's, I don't know, vibrating because there's something going on. It's all connected. So it's like they had to be on it. There was no dropping the ball there, but they did it so beautifully and really helped us, because I tell you what, we had so much to think of, so much to remember as well. And sometimes I'm like, dude, I need a second brain. Like, I need you guys because I can't remember certain things. What the hell happened? We might be doing a scene that's jumped, you know, 2 episodes, and I'm like, I can't even remember what's happened before that. You've got your scripts, but sometimes you just need a fantastic director to be like, hey, this is what they were doing then. You know, this is what you're going to before. Don't forget that you're like, thank you. And that's a part of what a great director does. I mean, great actor as well. You got to know your stuff as well. But sometimes it's just like, my brain's not working. It's late at night. We've been going for 15 hours. I'm like, please help me be my brain. You know, so they were great. They were really, really great.
So there are things that you want to talk about and things that are good to talk about. And then there's things that you go, I don't want to talk about this. And it's funny, like, I think there's also things that...
What don't you want to talk about?
Well, sometimes when it heads into sort of emotional... Sorry, there's a scene in the show, right, in Ep 4, where Molly and Alex are in a car. And I had this idea, I was like, you know what? I want to push this into a more emotional place than maybe Greg McLean, the director, and I have spoken about. But I'm not going to talk to him about it, and I just want to do it. And I also wanted to throw these lines in for Emma that Emma's not going to expect me to, something about our past, something we used to do as kids, that I was like, I'm not going to tell Emma about that. So I kind of went into the scene with all this sort of, it's like ammo, you know, like it's kind of like you've got all this ammunition, and sometimes I want to talk about the ammunition with the director and want to build it up together. And then there's times it's like, you know what, I really want to surprise people. And that day, you know, I kind of said stuff, and this is not me blowing my own horn by any means, but I kind of said stuff to Emma that got this amazing reaction out of her. It's one of my favorite moments in the show. And then also Greg that day got very excited by the scene, which sort of backfired on me because then he ended up covering it in so many angles. And by the end, it was like, oh man, I'm exhausted. Why have I gone into this so emotionally? But it's a scene in the show that is it's my favorite scene in the show, like personally. And, you know, I think we were really lucky that, I keep saying this, but lucky that I had an actor like Emma who works so much on instinct and is so reactive that she can kind of go any place, you know, with you. And also directors like Greg, who, as you said, you know, all the directors had so much history working within the genre, but then they're also great at subverting some of the tropes that normally come with the genre, but were also so open to what you were bringing to the table.
Well, both of your performances in the series are so astounding, especially just the level of detail behind every single scene. So congratulations on all of that. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. This has been fantastic. Enjoying talking about it all, reminiscing on the show. We're very excited for everyone to see it.
Yeah, and I'm thrilled that it's getting released over there and that everyone will have a chance to see it.
Mm-hmm.